recording. Okay. Yeah, we can go.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome back, everybody. Today and tomorrow and possibly Thursday, we're going to be looking more at the symbol. Whereas spiritual warfare, which is more about going into detail about the symbol and its symbolic references in the different sciences, traditional sciences, and how the role that it plays and so forth. So it's, as you know, it's also called Vajullah. That's the way the Sufis had called it originally. So we're going to study the Sufi Enneagram. And beginning with some of this is repeat from it's kind of a review of the spiritual warfare. What is tradition? What is form? What is meaning? And then the secrets of the symbol, dynamics, the concept of matter, concept of surface, the concept of shape, the concept of space, and the conclusion. So in this course, we'll go into much more detail about the different, you could call it architectural elements of matter, surface, shape, and space, and the dynamics of it. So the sign of the presence of God is these 9 points on the Sufi Enneagram. 3, 6, and 9 are off of the circumference because they're showing a lack in quality. So it's called undeveloped, underdeveloped, or should be undeveloped, and overdeveloped or underdeveloped. So, and the goal is to, the goal was to center ourselves in the virtues, the 4 cardinal virtues. So we begin with what is tradition, and this is one of the major areas where we differ from the Enneagram as it's used today, because they never draw the center point, which is the goal in the Sufi Enneagram, is to draw yourself into the center. So these are 2 of the constants in tradition, where we speak of continuity from, passing over time, with the idea of center and the idea of origin. And Ibn Arabi says, know that we call God's deputy the spirit, the ruh, the center of the circle of existence. So this is like the center of the circle of existence, and this is the point that we're trying to reach.
Can I ask a question here?
Sure.
Regarding the circle, and can you shed some light on where in history, from where did the first guy or the first guru or a teacher talked about the cosmos or the universe or the manifestation of God on the circle symbol? Is it Ibn Arabi or some people before Ibn Arabi? I mean, identify.
Yeah, no, it's much before Ibn Arabi, and I would say it's even in Plato and Aristotle. It's possible there. And of course, if you go back and look at archaeological ruins, many of the very early societies, maybe the Aztec, for instance, also had the circle as the symbol of existence, because it's the most perfect of geometric forms.
Yeah.
So
and it's also similar to the sky. I mean, the sky, if you
and to the universe. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So Ibn Arabi says that God entrusted it with this honored state, that is the circle of existence, because he knew its potential to rule in justice within the domain of each individual human being. And this point then is a point of justice that we're trying to reach in order to morally heal and become fair and just people. Without it, it would have remained a dot upon the circumference. Instead, God took the spirit from the circumference and placed it in the center of the sphere. The proof of the characteristics of justice at the center is that all of the radii from the center to all points of the circumference are equal. And if a circle is to be drawn, the center is absolute necessity. Thus, the center is the cause of the circle. No matter how big a circle or sphere, its measurement depends upon the center. The circle exists because of its center. The center is the guide, the commander. Without this, there is neither circle nor sphere. So in a sense, you can't really draw the Enneagram without the center. And if you do, it's not really showing what the circle can do and what the circle represents. You're just constantly, on the circumference. It's kind of like a wheel that never stops turning. Ibn Arabi, we see here the drawing. The form is the circumference, and the meaning is the center point that we're trying to get to, the way to reach the reality. This is the haq, or God, which is like the center, or the spirit of God that was breathed into Adam and then into the children or progeny of Adam, and that became the center point here. So it's the law. We can see the outer sign. We can look at it as the law, and then this is the way, and then reality. So they're seen as Sharia, Tariqa, and Haqiqa. This is how they're described. So Ibn Arabi explains, Gnostics, that's Arifin, aim to understand the real meaning of things beyond their external form. In the world today, we just look at the external form, our body, for instance, take care of that. But we forget sometimes that we have a spiritual interior that we need to be in contact with. When your eye sees something around you, you seek out its origin, its essential meaning, which will explain it or transform it. With the eye of the heart, when the eye of the heart recognizes the divine qualities, the Asmaul Husna, manifested in something, it also recognizes the equivalent inside us. So what does that mean? For instance, when we see God provides us with our sustenance, and then when we see that we can provide our family with our sustenance, we're actually recognizing that that name and quality is within us as well as being in the universe through God's acts. That thing is no longer an once we take it within ourselves, the divine names, the thing is no longer outside and separate from us, but is known to have become a part of us. And then we name it from among our names. So we notice that there is something providing us with sustenance, and we name it the provider, which is one of God's 99 names. Yes.
Can I have a comment here or a question here? I was talking to some of my colleagues who's following a Sufi method or a Sufi way regarding this model, and he said that this is identical or similar to what they call the 3 levels of Islam, Iman, and Ihsan.
Yes.
Can we relate this to Iman, Islam? Because these are the levels of people's relation to God. Islam is a state or level, and then Iman is a higher level, and Ihsan is the top thing.
Yes. That comes from the hadith that when the prophet spoke to Gabriel, and Gabriel asked him, what is Islam, what is Iman, and what is Ihsan? And William Chirico, I was mentioning, has a book that he wrote with his wife. Her name, she's Japanese, Sachiko Murata, and the vision of it's called The Vision of Islam, and it's an excellent book, but it's based exactly on that hadith. So we can also apply that hadith to the drawing we have here, and saying the law is Islam, and the way is the Iman, Imam, and Iman, and the reality is Ihsan, when we're in an altruistic state and we're serving others instead of just ourselves.
Yeah.
So he's very, very right that that's a very important part of the Sufi tradition, that hadith.
Yeah, okay.
So now we get to what Rumi says. He says that, so we are the flute and our music comes from God. In other words, now this outer circumference is like a flute. It's like a ney, the reed flute. Its outer form, regulated by the law, is as a reed flute through which passes the breath. Both the outer form and the law and the hollow interior or the way are essential to being a flute. But there's only music when the breath encounters its interior. When the inside or qualitative aspect of the flute wants to be what it wants to be in order to produce harmonic sounds dictates the outside shape of the flute. When the law concentrates on the ethics of the form or container, the way concentrates on that which is contained. The ethics of the way, then, are in addition to those of the law, and neither can be substituted for the other. So this is also very important, the idea that of the breath. This is how we speak and how we recite the divine names and so forth is through the breath. And in the work of Ibn Arabi, this is called Nafas Rahman, or the breath of the compassionate. And whether we're calling this the law, the way, and the truth, or we're looking at this as music, and this inside depends how you form the openings on the outside is what is going to bring music once we breathe into the flute. Yes? Is that a question?
I think, no. Okay.
Okay. So the Sufi Enneagram, or Vajala, contains the two elements of continuity, of center and origin, and has both a form and an underlying meaning to discovering the truth. So that's what the basic idea of the Sufi Enneagram, of the symbol, is that it does have a center and it does have an origin which goes back to God, and it has both a form and a meaning. So when we see something, or meet someone, we actually try to go to understand the meaning of this person, or what this person is trying to say to us. We try to understand it. So, and then we name it. So it's both a name and a form, or a name and a meaning, in order to discover the truth. Okay, so the secrets of the symbol as signs upon the horizons and within the self, which is that famous Quranic verse, Surah 41, chapter 53. But now we're going to analyze it, take it apart, and look at it as in terms of dynamics, matter, color, surface, shape, and space. And what we have to do is use our imaginations to see the Sufi Enneagram as within us ourselves, and that this diagram is within us, and we're trying to understand who we are and what we need to work on in order to morally heal. So it begins with the idea of the energies, or the dynamics, which are called the Qovat, Qova, Qava. How do you pronounce them, Sherry? Qawa, Qawa, the faculties, powers, or abilities. Now, in all the traditional sources, and in even from the Greek tradition, when they speak about traditional works, or traditional, when they speak about the natural philosophy, or even philosophy itself, they speak about these three energies. So one is called the natural enemy. It's the Quwwat Tabiya, and then the vital energy, Nafsaniya, and the nervous, or Hayvaniya. So these three,
النفسية الحيوانية.
Yeah. So these three were blown into us, breathed into us when God, these three are from the spirit. So it's the spirit that then animates our soul and our body, which are which are created at the same time. So according to, for instance, some of the traditional philosophers. So the dynamics is about the pattern of growth and change of our body, which is based on an energy system that moves between what we perceive and how we are motivated to act, and how we are motivated to act from what we perceive. So the terms, as you see in this drawing here, affect and behavior, we know are the nafsa amare, and this is basically our motivational system, whereas cognition is obviously our cognitive system. So these are the two major, can you go outside and say hello? Oh, sorry, one second. Hello? The phone rings.
Okay.
So this is our motivational system, and this is our cognitive system.
What is meant by here by venial?
As well as our cognitive.
Venial and arterial here.
Yes.
What's meant by these words?
Okay, the natural goes through our veins, and the vital goes through our arteries.
Okay.
So that's the energies.
Okay. Yeah.
So the energy system moves between what we perceive and how we are motivated to act, and how we are motivated to act from what we perceive. Our impulses, and which is basically our nafsa amare, incline towards something imprinted on our external senses. And in all of the traditional works, they talk about the 5 external senses and the 5 internal senses. So the 5 external senses are, as we know, hearing, seeing, tasting, touching, and smelling. And our internal senses are called common sense, representation, imagination, or intuition and reason, and memory or recall. And it's these that cause us to act. It's our perception. These are part of our perception, system of perception. And we have both internal, external senses and internal senses. And these impulses are filtered through what is called the practical intellect, or the aql amali, aql amali. And that's how we respond. In the traditional world, we have 2 reasons. One is called the practical reason. The other is called theoretical reason, which is ilm nazari or aql nazari. And there are traditional 3 sources of energy, as we've said: the natural, the vital, and the nervous faculties or powers or abilities. And the natural governs the nutritive powers of the liver, and the reproductive powers of the generating organs, which is here A, affect, and the vital governs the preserving the integrity of the breath, sensation, and movement of the heart, and the nervous, or the hayvaniya, controls the brain and the rational faculty. Now, why they called the brain the nervous system or hayvaniya? Because it sounds like it's from the animal, and you would think it would be the animal soul. But this is how they've defined the 3.
May I ask a question here?
Sure.
Regarding the internal senses,
yes.
Where it's concentrated, is it also in the gut, in the body, in the liver, or in the cognition?
No, it's all in the
both,
brain.
In the brain. They are all in the brain, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
But
it functions through our brain.
But the other senses are in the body. Yeah.
Because our hearing is through our ears, seeing is through our eyes, tasting is through our tongue, touching is through our fingers, and smelling is through our nose. So it's those 5 organs that are part of the external senses. But it's our soul that has been animated by our spirit that then allows us to hear or see or taste or touch or smell from the energies that it's provided.
Okay.
And then our internal senses are these common sense, imagination, and so forth. And these that all together, these cause us to act. So these are all our perceptions that relate to our behavior and how we act based on the energies that we're receiving. Okay. So the natural governs the nutritive powers of the liver. It's basically our digestive system and our reproductive system. The vital governs the preserving the integrity of the breath, sensation, and movement of the heart. And the nervous system controls the brain and the rational faculties.
Okay.
So now we're still talking about the dynamics, which is to awaken the consciousness of self, which is part of our cognitive system. And this is based on also our Fitratullah. So when God breathed his spirit within us, he not only activated our soul, but he gave us our Fitratullah as well. That's part of our spirit, the spirit within us. And it's served by the nervous energy. And the whole point is to turn to our Fitratullah if we have moved away from it. There's some people maybe who are still in the state of the Fitratullah as it's described in the Quran, but others have moved away from it, and then we have to go back, try to go back to that. So we do it through consciousnness, which is developed through reminders or signs. And signs are ayah, so that every verse of the Quran is a reminder to us, as well as the Quran itself is a reminder. We develop the potential for consciousness when God blew his spirit within, or breathed his spirit within. And one of the names of the Quran, as I've said, is reminder. That's in Surah 15, verse 9. And one method through gaining consciousness is called through rhetorical questions. It is a method that breaks blockages in the mind caused by paradoxes and contradiction. And we can see, for instance, God says in the Quran in Surah 39, verse 9, what can those who know be equal to those who know not? That's kind of a rhetorical question. So, yes,
yeah.
Yes. So this is also known as the Socratic method, is the idea of questioning. And it's interesting to note that of the 6,000 or so verses of the Quran, over 1,000 verses are questions, which is not something that we're usually taught when we're taught about the Quran. But, just for instance, the one here, or God asking, will you not be reasonable? Or, so many times he asks us questions that really have no answer except to awaken consciousness within us as to, well, what are you doing? I mean, think about it. What are you, what are your actions? What are your emotions? What's happening? It's kind of developing that ability to have that second that we spoke about, to reflect on what it is that we're saying or doing, or even thinking.
Yeah.
So that's all part of our dynamics. And then another part is activating our conscience and willpower. And I should have said our consciousness is our nafs mulhami, and the conscience is the nafs lavami, and our willpower is ikhtiyar or iradeh, depending on whether we're using our natural willpower or we're choosing the good through ikhtiyar. So our conscience is the highest form of our perception. So our perception was done through our 5 internal senses, beginning with common sense and ending in recall, the 5 that we spoke about. And our conscience is located in the practical intellect, in the ilm amali, as part of our fitratullah. Because our free will and willpower, we're able to accept or reject the advice of our conscience. So when our nafs al-lavami tells us you shouldn't do this, or why did you do that, and so forth, our willpower can either say, well, I really felt like it, or this person has angered me, or we could say, well, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. We can reflect on it and say, I shouldn't have done that. So our human willpower is the highest form of our motivational system. We're motivated through our willpower, and it can take us, through the nafs amare, and it can take us, as we know, to the heights of goodness or the heights of not following God's laws and God's command. Our willpower is naturally predisposed to be fair and just and to avoid conflict. This is very interesting, that our willpower actually our irade is to be fair and just and to avoid conflict. So there's a lot of people who, no matter, whatever a situation is, they run away from it in order to avoid conflict. They don't want to get into it, as the expression goes, but we're naturally predisposed to be fair and just through our fitratullah and to avoid conflict, but we're given our behavioral system or, there's something that we need to kind of respond to. But we overuse it is what happens. We overuse our anger, for instance, and to an extent that it shouldn't, it's not appropriate. Now, through habit, our willpower learns to seek counsel of our reason. So this is why it's very important to form good habits, because our habit can train our free will to listen to our reason. That, I shouldn't have said that to that person, and we're able to, it becomes a habit. And one of the ways that, for instance, that habit is broken is by making ourselves apologize to the person that we have hurt or said something hurtful to. And then when we do it several times, then we begin to recognize that we are doing this, and we stop doing it because basically we don't want to have to apologize continuously. And it works also with our sense of repentance towards God, and we keep repenting from something that we do that we know is not part of God's will or God's way. And but after a while, when we keep asking God to forgive us and we continue to do it, then after a while, our conscience wakes up and says, well, how many times are you going to keep asking this? And you need to stop doing this kind of thing. And then our willpower, if we've trained it and it's become a habit to listen to our reason, then we are able to break that habit. So our willpower is naturally disposed to be higher than even our ability to reason. So our willpower is the strongest, is stronger than our reason, than our cognition. And that's why it needs to be trained to listen to reason, because it doesn't have to listen to reason. So that means that it's higher than reason. Therefore, when our willpower has a choice, it makes the final decision, and our reason is only a guide or a counselor. Because, as I say, our willpower we don't have to listen to our reason. So that shows that our willpower is higher. We don't have to listen to our reason or our conscience, and that's when we get into trouble. So that was the section on dynamics. I don't know if you want to ask questions now or after we finish another section.
If no one has questions, I have one.
Okay.
Okay. I don't understand how habit can teach the willpower that we need to seek counseling of our reason.
Right. Well,
because in my understanding, habit is automatic. Habit is mechanical. Habit is something that we were not aware of. We're doing without being conscious. So.
No, habits are something that, we can be very conscious of. For instance, like we tend to swear often.
Okay.
It's become a habit that we constantly swearing at somebody or something. So that is something that we can become conscious of and overcome. It's not that we're naturally born to do that. Or prayer, for instance, a good habit is prayer. And through telling ourselves that we have to pray, that we actually develop a desire to want to pray, then it becomes a habit for us.
So you mean here through awareness of our habits, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So then our willpower learns by us changing our habits or staying with our good habits. I mean, maybe we have a lot of good habits. We're very kind to our parents or to older people, or to, we help the poor. These are all habits as well. And these are good habits to have. So it's not like habits are bad. They can be good as well.
Yeah.
But we have to recognize which ones are the good ones and which ones are the ones we need to change. And through that, we have to change our willpower to, okay, this is a habit that I need to change, and I'm going to change. And so our reason then, our willpower then backs off when our reason continues. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's clear now.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So now we get to the second one, the concept of matter. And this we have talked about before, but it's basically the concept of the elements. And in all of the traditional worldview, the elements, which are not the part of the elemental periodic table of chemistry, but these are actually, they're called them the elements, but they're actually the principles. They're also called arkan, or pillars, the pillars. And it is the conception is that between the moon and the earth, that sublunar region is where the elements are alive and thrive. And we know that they're there because when we listen to the weather report, we hear that it's hot and wet, or cold and dry, and so forth. So these are all the elements, but nobody ties it back to the elements, so we forget that they're where they came from, and we just think the wind is coming from the north, or there's a jet stream coming across the country, or whatever. So but we need to know as we go forward, and particularly in studying the Sufi Enneagram, that the role of the elements is very important, which are, of course, fire, air, water, and earth. And fire's hot and dry, and air's hot and wet, water's cold and wet, earth is cold and wet. And this diagram is not showing anything on the Enneagram, but it's a way of showing that fire is dry and hot. And because the dry and wet are passive states, and hot and cold are active states. So that's why the passive has a negative sign, and the active has a positive sign. Or earth is dry and cold, or air is hot and wet, or water is cold and wet. So it is a way of showing the elements in the kind of a circle. So the four elements of fire, air, water, and earth are the basic building blocks of traditional medicine and psychology. The four elements are inclined not only to ascend and descend, but also to move in a circular direction, which is, of course, because of the wind, so it's which is the air element. Each element is joined by one of its qualities to that which is below, and by the other to that which is above. So, for instance, air is above water, and fire is above air, or earth is above water, and fire is above earth. Hot and cold are, as I said, active qualities, and dry and wet are passive qualities. So this is a very important element in traditional medicine as well as in moral healing, because, we've heard so much about eating cold foods if we have a temperature, or using the elements of the temperaments of the elements to heal. And so this is also used in traditional medicine, and we'll see later as we go through this how it's used in moral healing. We also talked about it in the last sessions. So again, as we explore the concept of matter, and this is a drawing that we're familiar with, which shows all of the 9 points on the Sufi Enneagram, as well as the threefold division of the self. That's the threefold division here, and here, which then divides these into affect, behavior, and cognition. And affect and behavior, as we remember, are the nafs amare, and the this part is the cognition. So we know that fire is hot and dry. It matures, rarefies, refines, and intermingles, bringing all things into harmony. Also, if anyone does their astrological chart, called the Indra chart, it will show how much of the element of fire, air, water, or earth is in their chart based on the planets. Based on the planets and in our chart. So air is the ability to rise. Like the wind, it is manifested in invocation, speech, and prayers, corresponding to the breath of the compassionate. Water is cold and wet, lends itself to dispersion and assumes any shape, allowing matter to be molded. Earth, cold and dry, is dense, passive, heavy. Its geometric symbol is the cube, and its nature is the cosmic mountain. When you study the four elements and these four and their four elemental qualities in terms of the astrological chart or the Indra chart, each one of these has a particular personality characteristic as well. So, and it relates to the definition of what fire is or what being hot and dry is. And so that's also interesting for people to further understand the elements is through the astrological charts. So we see that all of the plus signs, the signs that are too much of or overdeveloped, are fire signs, whereas the negative signs are air, air, and air. And the and we'll see later how we go from the 12 that are here to the 9, which are the Enneagram, because the 3 here are the water signs, and we'll see what role they play in the coming images.
Okay.
Now, another way to look at the concept of matter, or to know that according to traditional psychology and traditional medicine, the elements are created within us, within our body, and they are the ones that create the humors. The humors are what the Quran talks about as akhlaq. In chapter 96, verse 2, when God created us with a blood clot. The humors are basically a blood clot. All 4 of these humors, the bilious, the sanguineous, the serous, and the atrabilis, are all contained within the blood. So even though sanguineous means blood, but the blood contains all of these. And they've done studies, whereas if you were to take a vial of blood and leave it for 24 hours, it would divide up into these 4 humors. So it's not that they're not there anymore. It's just that the tests for cholesterol or whatever other reason why we're taking a blood test do not go into what the elemental qualities are. But in the traditional world, this was, and also in Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine, these are still very important elements that need to be considered by the dietitian, by the person who's diagnosing the illness, whatever the illness happens to be. So the humors are the primary fluids of the body that move through the inner space of our body. Matter in terms of food and drink are transformed into innate heat through the digestive process. And in the traditional world, as we were talking about cold or hot foods, every food also has, and drink also has an elemental quality or a mizaj or a temperament. And from the humors then form our mizaj or our temperament. So it's very important that we understand how it goes from the elements to the humors to our temperament. And that then is part of our digestive process and what we eat. This process produces the 4 humors that sustain and nourish the body and move through the channels or meridians within our body. They connect to the zodiac in the macrocosm and the Sufi Enneagram in the microcosm. So these 4 signs are showing its connection to both basically to the macrocosm, but it's the universe, but it's also showing us how it connects to us as well. So this is Virgo and Capricorn and Taurus, which are historically, in terms of astrology, cold and dry elements, and that's the Artrabilis humor. Then Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius are the air elements, and Leo, Aries, and Sagittarius are the bilious, and Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces are the cirrus. This Atrabilis is also called black bile. The sanguineous is also called blood. The bilious is called yellow bile. Soda, maybe something, I don't know if you're familiar with those. And cirrus is...
صفراوية. We call it العصارة الصفراوية. Yes. It goes from the...
That's right, yes.
From the liver. It comes from the liver.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. And the Sirius, which is the phlegm, which is, like if we have a cold, or the liquid parts that are not contained, that are not blood or bile. That's called the phlegm. So the humors in ratio correspondence with the elements and qualities, the 4 humors with the elements, and the qualities with the zodiacal sign. So this is another way of understanding the relationship between the humors and our body. So because we are considered to be, as the microcosm, we're considered to be the exact replica of everything that's in the universe, of the macrocosm. Not in terms of physical, but in terms of the spiritual side of the hidden kind of, but not the manifest, but the hidden elements and qualities.
I have a question here. I've read something regarding that these 4 humors, not everyone has the same ratio in each one of them. I mean,
that's right. That's right. Exactly. That's why we have different temperaments or mizaj based on our humors, and also based on what we eat and eat or drink. So everybody is different, and that's another reason why the alternative medicines, such as our traditional Islamic medicine or Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine, why they say that each person needs to be treated as an individual, because each individual differs. But the way they do statistics today in the scientific world, we're all kind of lumped into something that may or may not be real for us, or may exist within us for that moment, but because we change and our body changes, then a minute later, we're different, or after we've eaten something, we're in a different state or temperament. So the diagnosis based on each as an individual is a very important part of the traditional medicine, traditional world, and particularly alternative medicines, as opposed to the modern medicine, where we're supposed to all take a pill, and we can see that has side effects in different people, resulting in different ways, some very dangerous and some healing, because the modern medicine doesn't take us as individuals. It takes us as groups of people, depending on maybe age or gender and so forth. So that's very true. We all have a different mizaj.
Yeah, and also it hits me right now the meaning of the word mizaj in Arabic. Mizaj, it comes from mazij, or you're mixing things together.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how it's used in the Quran.
Yamzig,
yes.
Mizaj, mazij. Yes.
Yes. That's how it's used in the Quran too, the word. Yeah. But it came to be the temperament in English. Doesn't mean that it's that, but yes, that's true.
Okay.
Okay, so
can we have any questions here, or anybody who has any question? Okay.
So we're still looking into the concept of matter, and we can look at it in terms of alchemy, kimyogari, or alchemy, which in alchemy, minerals are divided into spirits, and that's not the root, that's a different concept. Spirits, metallic bodies, and bodies. Spirits are minerals readily volatile by fire. Metallic bodies are those that may be hammered, becoming lustrous and producing a sound, whereas bodies are mineral substances that cannot be hammered, but can be pulverized and made into, dry powder kind of thing. So when we look at the Sufi Enneagram, the spirits or the minerals, which can be volatilized by fire, are mainly involved with our cognition, and bodies or mineral substances, which can be pulverized, are mainly involved with our affect, and metallic bodies, which can be hammered, or more like our behavior, because we can change our behavior, or we can, but we only can discipline our affect. So this is one way that some people have compared the concept of affect, behavior, and cognition to alchemy and the minerals that are part of the alchemical process. Now, even to go even further, every metal symbolically, and this is in alchemy, every metal symbolically contains a combination of sulfur and mercury. So, for instance, mercury is cold and wet, and sulfur is hot and dry. So we can see that something cold is a contraction, something wet is a solution, something dry is a fixation, and something hot is expansion. That's the concept of sulfur and mercury within the alchemical tradition. For the self as lead, which is metal, the sulfur segment, reason, at first is confused and heavy, heavier than mercury, which are segments A and B, or the passions. So mercury is seen, for instance, as the passions, and sulfur is seen as our cognition. These two forces, opposite and complementary, are combined with quicksilver, which is the vital spirit, or the breath. And the process is to transform the sulfur as confused, unorganized reason into sulfur as the spirit. The ash that results from the burning of the sulfur and mercury, where the breath acts as the fire, is symbolized by salt, and salt in turn is a symbol of justice and balance. There are many Sufi groups who, for instance, take a bit of salt before they eat. It's going back to this kind of alchemical tradition, because it's a concept of justice and balance. After you've gone through the problems with reason, or trying to discipline our discipline our passions, and so forth. So this is, again, explanation from the alchemical point of view, which is also part of the Enneagram, the history of the Enneagram symbol.
Okay.
So through the correlation with the four elements and their natural qualities of hot, cold, wet, and dry, and the four humors of sanguineous, bilious, serous, and atrabilious, as well as the alchemical processes of spiritual transformation, the Sufi Enneagram guides ourselves to the path to becoming balanced, just, and fair. So, and the sanguineous, as I said, is blood. The bilious is the yellow bile. Serous is phlegm. And atrabilious is the black bile. So this is kind of a summary, if anyone has any questions, of what this part has just been, this on matter.
Okay, any questions?
Could we take a break and then come back for the...
Okay, I have one question regarding the last,
yes.
The last why specifically mercury and sulfur here?
I don't know. That's what the alchemists came up with, that these two were the main elements in. Actually, they were trying to create gold, was one of the,
Yes.
not for those who weren't spiritual, they were actually trying to produce gold. And they found that these were the metals and minerals that they could use that would allow them to. But then they just became symbolic elements of healing through the alchemical process and working on ourselves. There's one Sufi, Rashid Field, I think his name is, he works a lot with the alchemical process in the healing process. So it was just those elements, I mean, those chemicals or metals, for some reason, their reactions to each other then ended up like mercury does contract and is a solution, whereas sulfur is fixated and expansion. Somehow that's how their natural qualities are. So they then develop these systems based on alchemy.
So you mean that the behavior of these two materials together are much similar to the dynamics between the passion and the cognition?
Yes.
Yes, something like that. So, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's how they would understand them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. 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 If you don't have questions, we can break for 5 minutes and we'll come back.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. About alchemy and how they used it and what it was.
Okay. Ibn Khaldun. No.
Do you know Ibn Khaldun?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah. The world's first sociologist, as he's known.
Yes, yeah, he's very famous of that, yeah.
Yes. But he also has in the, like the third volume, a lot about alchemy and abjad and all the other kind of things. Describes him very well. Okay. So now we're at the concept of color, where Rumi says the world of color cannot be devoid of opposition. The marvel is that color sprang from that which is without color, which is of course light. That which is without color is pure light, the realm of pure being and absolute unity, in which there is no individualization. Once determined, light becomes the source of existence. So as the Quran says, God is the light of the heavens and the earth. So color comes from that which is without color. So this is kind of an interesting understanding of it from kind of a spiritual point of view. And so we can look, yeah.
Can we say here that the colors represents the differentiation that happens to human being since the inception of human beings inside the womb, and then the birth we start to differentiate. So exactly like colors are differentiated from light. So can we say something like this? On this is represent the differentiation.
You mean in the skin colors?
No. I mean colors. I mean colors.
Oh, like red and blue and so forth.
Yes.
Well, I don't think in the womb there's a issue of colors or light. It's that once we breathe, once we begin to breathe when we're born.
I mean from the moment of birth, we start to differentiate. Yeah.
Right. And how that connects to light. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Well, of course, I think it's at least 6 weeks before a baby can actually see and distinguish colors. So it's not something that happens right away. But if we see light as wujud, as existence and the creation of existence, then we understand it in a different way, because once we're born, obviously light has played a role. If if we are, existing, then light has played a role in that. And what was that role? That's very interesting. I don't know. But of course, one of the most famous sections of the Quran is the verse on light.
Okay.
So it's telling us how important light is. And then we have the color chart, which we saw before, showing the days of the week and the planetary signs, which would be like Friday is Venus, is white, Thursday sandalwood, it's Jupiter, blue is Mars, or Mercury, red is Mars, green is Moon Day, Monday, and yellow is Sunday, and black is Saturn, Saturday. So the color and what, the days of the week, and then their correlation with the planets. And these are the 7 planets that are visible by the naked eye, and then the colors that are connected to those days. So the question is, for instance, if somebody wanted to understand somebody's, say like they were a counselor and they were trying to morally heal someone, then they wanted to understand where they were, what color. They might even draw the colors on the Enneagram. Maybe they draw the line of the spirit in that color. I mean, there were other ways, creative ways to use the colors within the Enneagram, which right now nobody is really, I haven't seen, maybe there's somebody, but I haven't seen anyone using the concept of color in that way, in the same way that as we see with the next slide, the Sufis do in determining, it was the Khwajagan Sufi group that I was trying to think of, that are very, use a lot of color in by the master in understanding where the disciple is in their particular state that they're in, and they use, and that person actually begins concentrating on colors to attain to the next state, kind of thing.
What's the name again? Khorjagan?
Yeah, Khwajagan.
Can you spell it?
Khwajagan. The Khwajagan, and the Khalvati, not Khalvati, the Kobravi, also Sufi order. Kobravi, Kubrawi, Sufi order. There are traditionally 40 Sufi orders. There are a lot more today, which are not part of the traditional world, but these were part of the traditional 40 Sufi groups.
Okay.
And color plays an important role. Also color in Ibn Sirin, as we mentioned before, Ibn Sirin's Dictionary of Dreams, and the importance of colors and what color you see. And also the colors were used in medicine to determine if someone is constantly seeing, for instance, red color, that's a sign of a hot and dry color. And that means that their fire humor is out of balance. Their blood, for instance, is out of balance. So I don't know if studies have been done on people's dreams and the colors they see, but that's also a way of treating and healing people, is determining the colors that they see.
Okay.
So color becomes an orientation for the mystics, as I mentioned, by which they judge the level of their realization. The master judges the level of realization of their disciples. And beyond time, only the world of color provides direction and orientation. Even we see the way they understand the cosmos, and how, the colors on the computer somehow are tinted blue, which indicates a different kind of, atmosphere than a red does, and it's very interesting how they've used the colors and in order to understand the universe.
Yeah, I can mention here something regarding the impact or the effect of colors on human beings. In biogeometry, colors in the biogeometry is not red or green. It's a wavelength, and each human being has a wavelength, and this wavelength sometimes it resonates more with a specific color other than the other. You know, so we react to colors according to our individual wavelengths. And this is how different colors affect us in different ways.
Very interesting. Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, you know,
so that's why
because also colors are, you know, the spectrum or the 7 visible colors are not the only, there are an infinite number of wavelengths that our eyes cannot perceive.
There are an infinite number of wavelengths?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, other than the 7 colors, there are other colors that are not perceived within the limits of our eyes and our retina and so on. So, but it's at the same time, we get affected by them.
Yes.
So we are affected by the wavelengths of the color, not by the color itself. The color creates the wavelengths.
That's very interesting. Yeah. And that's why, for instance, some animals who see colors that we can't see, and that's has a special meaning for them, or insects and things like that.
Yeah.
So color, and of course that all goes back to light, and that, you know, the degree of light that something has. Exactly. The weakness or intensity of a light, a particular, like you're saying, wavelength. That's, I had never heard that. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So now we come to the concept of surface, which we had discussed before. And this is an example is the miniature. The sign of the presence of God is similar because the Enneagram, as it's being presented today, is a 2-dimensional form. It's a 2-dimensional symbol. And should it be 3-dimensional? That's a question. I don't know. Would it work 3-dimensionally as well as it does 2-dimensionally or not? And why is it, do we have, you know, have we just remained with 2 dimensions? But the reason why the miniature did was that the law of perspective is based on natural perspective when it's 2-dimensional, whose geometric laws were developed by Euclid and later by Muslim geometers and opticians. The 2-dimensionality transforms the plane surface to a surface depicting grades of reality. So you can see here's the garden and they're sitting, but then behind them is the mountain and the stars. And so it guides to an intermediate world with its own space, time, movement, colors, and forms. And the world Muslim philosophers have called the imaginal world. This was one famous French philosopher, more or less contemporary, by the name of Henri Corbin. He did a lot of work on the concept of the plane surface, of the 2-dimensionality of a surface, and particularly on the imaginal world. So it's not the world of imagination, which we all have, but it's the imaginal world that is part of the Sufi tradition, where it's the barzakh, or the isthmus between the body and the spirit, which is, of course, the world of the soul. And where is the barzakh, and what does it mean, and so forth. And this also relates to Plato's world of images and the archetypes that are existing in space, outer space, but they're part of the imaginal world that we go back to when we die. We go to the isthmus and wait then for the day of judgment, is another way of understanding the imaginal world. But within this 2-surface miniature, or within the 2-surface, 2-dimensional Enneagram, then we create the 3rd dimension by moving within it to understand where we are and where we have to go to morally heal. So it's important. The two-dimensionality of it is very important, but it could be that someone came up with the third dimension and it also worked. Have you seen that anyplace? I haven't seen that.
Is this, can we relate this to عالم المثال? عالم المثال?
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's
Hmm?
right.
Okay.
Yes, the world of
The similitudes,
yes.
the world of similitudes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's called the imaginal world. So
Hmm.
it's not called imagination. Corbin was very clear that this is the imaginal world. And he, of course, wrote in French, but that's how he translated it was, I mean, that's how it's spoken in English, is the imaginal world. So that what we're seeing here is actually just a shadow of the real thing that's in the Ulema Methought.
Okay.
The actual real one is in the spiritual world, and we're connecting to it through here in the physical world.
Okay. Hmm. Does this also can relate to, you know, people who can do the magical work? They make some sort of a miniature, like a doll or a small shape, or you know, a witness from somebody. Yeah, they draw something on paper and they work on it in order to affect someone else. So does this is related to this?
Yes. Well, that person then
The magic
is, you might say, in touch with the Ulema Methought, where the real and they're you know, having an effect on it in this world. They're able to move between the two worlds.
Yes.
And that is actually, there are many Arifin who are able to do that and to have, you know, what we would call miracles of some kind, or even to have extrasensory perception, or you know, being able to do some kinds of magic and so forth. It definitely is a possibility for those who have somehow connected to that world.
Yes.
Of the Ulema Methought that you mentioned. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now we get to the concept of surface. We continue with the concept of surface, and we discuss the concept of line, which of course in the Sufi Enneagram is the line of the spirit. But this is how line actually evolves itself, is you create a line and then you know, you cross the lines, or you know, you draw different forms within the lines, crossing the lines and seeing what forms you arrive at, and or like here, even more forms, and then finally you color the different forms so you get different kinds of patterns that are used particularly in architecture, on walls or tiling or stucco work, or even in carpets. These designs are, so they all go back to the line, the concept of the line. So this shows how everything, we need to go back to trace things back to their origin in order to be able to fully understand how something, you know, takes place. So here A shows two lines crossing over an axis, which is then mirrored across a threefold dimension in B. So it's been mirrored into this one. Lines overlap in C, creating boundaries within which shapes begin to emerge. And in D, the triangular repeat unity is reflected across a surface, this whole surface. And in E, the in-between shapes begin to form a traditional Islamic pattern with lines expressed as thick bands, often developed as a weave, for instance, in a carpet. So this is showing the line of the spirit, of course, is not began with this line and didn't go through all of these patterns, but these can create patterns based on the line. So that's another important aspect to it.
Okay.
Up to surface. So we continue with the concept of surface, and the concept of the line, the Sufi Enneagram as shapes, circumference and center, equilateral triangles, and parallelograms, for instance, these, and the line of the spirit, which has created these empty spaces, these void spaces, which became the parallelograms, or part of them are here, but half is not there, for instance. And then all three forms of symmetry are present in the sign. This is a sign of total symmetry. This is bilateral symmetry, where both sides are mirror images of each other. And this is radial symmetry, where you radiate out through the lines and you get a different design and a different pattern. So the concept of symmetry and the line, and then the symmetry and the geometric forms that are part of the Sufi Enneagram all relate back to the traditional sciences of mathematics and geometry. And they say that numbers, that geometry is the personality of numbers, is what they would say. So you're giving personality, for instance, to 4, the number 4, when you draw a parallelogram, or to the number 3 when you draw a triangle. So that's another, and certainly the Islamic world is replete with images and patterns, and it's unbelievable how many patterns we came to. And one of the, of course, main reasons is because we are forbidden to create images of the prophets, for instance, or the prophet. So in order to replace that, geometry became our best mode of expression. And then that geometry often formed into arabesques, into flower patterns, which again, they had no human form in it. But that created the beauty. So here we have, a Sharia law, which then people were able to take to an unbelievable, beautiful heights of geometric and arabesque patterns on walls, on surfaces, and in carpets, or on vases. I mean, it's just remarkable how the geometry developed in art.
Does this this type of geometry or drawings, is it similar to any of the architecture of the mosque in even in Persia or in the Islamic world? Does there any similarity between this and ornaments on any of the buildings?
Right. Well, they don't usually draw the circle, because it's not a pattern that when you put it together, you have these odd spaces. So they don't normally use the pattern of the circle, unless it's to highlight, for instance, a Quranic verse or something like that, in the middle of another pattern, which would be like the ones we saw previously. So but they do, in their organization of the patterns, they do use bilateral symmetry or total symmetry without the circle, and they use radial symmetry certainly all the time in their drawings. But they, it can be shown as a line, or it can be shown as a form which is within that line. So I think you would be hard pressed to find a traditional mosque that didn't have these symmetries in it, but it wouldn't necessarily be from the circle, because so they use more the hexagon, which fits exactly one to another in the tile patterns, or some of the other forms that fit exactly without giving you kind of an unusual space. When you would like put 2 circles together, then what do you do with this space? But if you put 2 hexagons together, they completely cover the surface.
Okay, 2 hexagons, yes, okay.
Yeah, so they use the symmetry, but not necessarily in the same way as with a circular pattern, with a circle on the outside.
Okay.
Without the circle, basically.
Okay.
And there are many parallelograms, many triangles, and so forth. in traditional architecture and art.
Okay.
So again, we've seen this concept of surface and the science of letters, where the 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet are divided into the elements of fire, air, water, and earth, and each one has a number, and this would be like abjad, havaz, it goes like this, whereas the circular one goes, in a circle. So in the healing the body, the 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet, depending upon their nature or natural quality, determine what food should be eaten to preserve the physical self in balance. The fire letters are hot and dry, the air letters are hot and wet, the water letters are cold and wet, and the earth letters are cold and dry, which we've already known and seen. So this is where we did, like, for instance, your name, Ahmad, and we did what number it was and saw that it was a balanced number and so forth in the previous course. But this is another way of understanding the surface is through the science of letters. So for instance, if someone were to take Quranic verses that are on a mosque and then to divide, add up each one of the letters and see what the number became, and then see, did that relate to the pattern, for instance? Did they, where was this used, for instance, in architecture or in art? But certainly it's used in the healing process, because the name, with the divine names, as we saw, where you would use the numbers and put the numbers into magic squares or into talismans. So there are only 2 more slides left where for this session, unless you want to go further, and then maybe we see tomorrow if we finish it and we don't have third session, or because there doesn't seem to be too many questions, or however you want to do it.
Okay. Any questions till now? Okay, let's move.
Okay, so this is how the science of letters is used, for instance, in calligraphy, where there are a number of dots that determine what how you draw this letter. So this is based on dots, and they use these dots very often in carpet design, in the design before they would create the carpet. But it all has to be, it's all based on a line. This is a line that would then determine the height of an Arabic letter in its calligraphic form. So the measure of letters in dots, vertically and horizontally and around the circumference of a circle, this is what this shows. The science of letters, simya, ilm simya, meaning signs, is a sacred science based on the Quran. So while nature, as seen as the cosmogonic Quran, or the Takvini Quran, the recorded Quran, Tadvini, is composed of letters and sounds. So are you familiar with the Takvini and Tadvini elements?
Can you explain, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Okay, so the nature is called, there are 2 kinds of creation, considered creation. One is the Quran in its spiritual element and its spiritual meaning, and the other is the recorded, or else the universe is considered to be the Quran in terms of not in terms of letters necessarily, but it's still considered to be the word of God as he created the universe. But the recorded Quran is called Tadvini creation, and that consists of letters and sounds. So there's a whole understanding of the concept of words and speech and letters, and that speech is the world from the spiritual world, whereas words are part of the physical world. Because our speech, the minute we've finished saying something, it disappears. It doesn't stay. But the words, when they're written, like in the Quran, they're always there in the book form. So that's considered Tadvini creation, whereas that which we don't see is hidden is our speech, and that is called Takwini creation. Did that explain it?
تكويني هنا does this mean that this is the Quran in the non-letter, non-sound form?
Yes, in the creation of the universe, the cosmos. Yes.
So it's like the relation between the body and the spirit. Maybe the body of the Quran,
Yes.
which is the letters and the sound, is the manifestation that we can sense.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the Takwini are the Quran, but it's in a non-physical form or something like that.
Yes, and that, you know, when God says kun fiyakun, when he says that, it's a word that he's saying, and everything is created. So, but you don't see it. It's an act. It becomes an activity. It becomes an act of God. So, but you don't see it. But that has to precede the writing of the words.
Yes.
So you have the word, the speech before the word. So therefore, that shows that there was a creator before the word was written. Or you have a scribe before the script is written.
Yeah.
So something has to become before. So it's proof of God's existence because we do have words. So where they came from God's speech when he commanded the universe, commanded things to be, and they were.
Yeah, and exactly something like that happens also to us as human beings, because before we speak and before we write anything, the thoughts come first to our mind. I mean, I'm thinking about the idea, so I speak it out, or I'm thinking about the idea, so I write it down. So
Yes.
from the moment that I thought, the idea existed, but in a non-form way.
Yes.
It's something like that, right? Yeah.
In a spiritual kind of way. I mean, in a hidden kind of way or an absent way. We could say it's absent, whereas the word is witnessed. We can witness the word, but the thought is absent in terms of material world. It's part of the spiritual world.
Okay.
So that's why our cognition is considered to have come from when God breathed his spirit within Adam. That's where our cognition came. And that's why we're different from other animals because God didn't blow his spirit into those animals, but he did into Adam, the first human being.
Yeah. Okay. Does these dots mean anything? The number of those dots, or the relationship?
No, it's just to show, like in books of calligraphy, where you're learning calligraphy, it will have these dots before it puts the letter. So that's how you learn calligraphy, is by the measuring of these dots before you draw the letter. Or the number of the dots before you draw the letter. So it's kind of a guide so that the letter is in perfect shape and form. It's not just hand drawn. It's got a meaning behind it. It's got a design behind it.
Okay. So I have another question here regarding the relationship between the direct meaning of the word and the ta'wil, which is the interpretation of the word, the ta'wil. So the simya means the sign, and that means the meaning of the word, but words doesn't have one meaning. It has several meanings. Like when we say the hand of God is above their hands. Hand here is a sign of the power. So hand in our world means the hand, the normal hand, but in the Quran it doesn't mean a hand. It means something else. So how does this relate to this?
Well, the science of letters it's not, meaning is just there as a word to say that it means signs. It's not that signs are meaning. So the science of letters is the physical. You actually see the letters, and it's based on the Quran. But the meaning behind the words then is the ta'avil that you're speaking about, and that depends on the the interpretation and understanding of the person who is looking at that word. So the literalists, like for instance, the Wahhabis, they see the hand as the hand. But the Sufis, who understand the meaning behind something, say if we're not able to create the image of God, why would we then be able to say that he's got physical forms like we have? Then what's the difference between drawing God with the hand or not using images? I mean, it's to put the hand as actual hand is too literal. So so much of words and so forth. So there has to be a meaning behind that word that God has used as hand, or many other examples in the Quran that would then refer you through ta'wil back to hermeneutics to what does this word actually mean? For instance, what do we do with our hand? What is the power of the hand? And so forth and so on. So it doesn't really have to do with the science of letters. It has more to do with the science of ta'wil, which itself is a science, and the interpretation or commentary upon the Quran.
The reason why I'm asking that question is because God chose to say in the Quran, yad, or the hand, means power. He could have used the power of God is above their power, and it will yield the same meaning. So using hand, this might mean something else. I mean, the choice of this word to represent power by itself could mean something. Otherwise, God could have used the power of God is above their power, or the control of God is above their control, or something like that.
Yes. Well, we have to think, we have to remember that while the Quran is revealed for all of humanity and for all time, it was actually given, by the Prophet to a community where they might not understand the word power in the same way that they understand hand. Because of the proverbs, for instance, that might be in the Arabic language early on as to what a hand means. So there may have been some who understood hand as hand, but there may be others who understood it to mean power, but God didn't use that word because of the people, to be able to include more people, maybe.
Okay.
We don't really know, what God's choices were and why.
Yes.
But
I'm trying to do some ta'wil. I mean, that's because the choice might have, because every word in the Quran has been chosen for a reason.
Yes.
For something. I mean, it's not random. It's not choice. It didn't come by random choice or by random order.
That's right.
That's what.
Right. So one interesting test would be to find out what the abjad of hand is and what words that relates to in terms of numbers that might be significant in the use of the word hand. For instance, that's one way.
I will do this direct after the session. I see yad, hand. How? What's the number of yad?
Yeah.
And try to
what does it relate to?
Yes.
So that would be using ta'wil.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a very important science so that we can get deeper into the Quran rather than just seeing it as literally exactly what it says and misinterpreting and acting in a way that's not conducive to other verses of the Quran. And then what do we do? Well, we'll just abrogate 150 verses of the Quran because they don't make sense now with this one. So that's kind of a backward way of thinking. But that's
Okay.
how some Muslims do think. Yeah.
Okay. Um, and another question, please, because I'm very very much interested, because in this in the letter, the harf, ilm al-harf, and so for example, the letters that came in the beginning of surahs in Quran, like Hamim, Alif Lam Mim, Kaf Ha Ya Ain Sad, and those letters, how do these relate to the takwini and the tadwini? I mean, in the cosmogenic, Hamim in the takwini realm.
They could. Well, we know that they are part of the Tadvini creation. They are part of the Quran. So again, it would be how they relate, maybe perhaps in terms of numbers, those letters, what the numbers are, and how those relate to, for instance, the divine names or other aspects of, other Arabic words and so forth. But the best source is the Al-Buni, which does have many sections on the special letters, at the mysterious letters at the beginning of the chapters.
Okay.
But I was so fascinated by it that I wanted to, one day be able to go back and read more about it, what these mystical, what these letters might mean. But because of the abjad system, it might be that that's a good way to begin, is to find out, what are the letters, the numbers, and then what do those numbers correspond to? Because according to Al-Buni, the number is this from the spiritual world, but the word is from the physical world. So everything connects back to the spiritual world through numbers. And that's, as I was mentioning, early on at least in the Middle Ages of the Islamic world, the scientists and mathematicians were understanding the cosmos through numbers. And that was way before the Western world, scientists and astrologists and astronomers and so forth, and physicists began understanding the universe through numbers.
Yeah.
So numbers are the key to the whole thing in a way. If you accept the fact that numbers come from the spiritual world, because God says in the Quran, everything we send down, its measure or number is known. So he's told us that numbers are very important from everything that he sent down. So now we need to connect these numbers to the spiritual world and find the connection there with the, back to the physical world, for instance, with things with numbers. So that's one of the important ways of understanding the mysterious letters at the beginning of the chapters. There have been many books written about it, many interpretations, but when I was reading the Al-Buni, I felt that his was by far the closest to what could be reality. So if you have a chance to kind of look at that, that's also important.
Okay. Yep. Okay.
Okay, so our last slide for today is a summary. The Sufi Enneagram, or Vajula, is a two-dimensional expression that, like the traditional Persian miniature, or the concept of line, or the science of letters, guides one to the imaginal world, which is what we've just basically been talking about. So it's through the Sufi Enneagram being two-dimensional, and which is similar to artwork, or the concept of line and the science of letters, that is a guide to us to Ta'avil, or to the spiritual world, or the Ulema Methought. So we just need to explore it more in order to find out, so many of the answers that we're seeking. But it's very important to keep asking questions. Yes.
Yep.
The most important way of learning and discoursing, and it's a very important aspect of critical thinking, which is something that critical thinking is not criticizing something, but it's learning to think in a way where you understand the depth of something. So, for instance, here, in America, all the teachers who are trained through the Department of Education, they all learn critical thinking skills, and they use it, for instance, in their classrooms. So it's a very important element to think about. And in critical thinking, one of the most important is answering questions or asking questions.
Yeah.
So for instance, the classroom, it's not so much that the teacher has to get through these 50 pages in, the day, but it may be at the first, page, the students have so many questions that they never get beyond page 1. But that they learn much more at that lesson than they would have if they memorized the 50 pages, for instance, because they learn how to think.
Yep. Mm.
So
can I have the last question? I mean, when
sure.
Regarding the colors,
yes,
how does this is related to the Enneagram? I mean, is this
it's just a hint. It's kind of a hint or a suggestion that because the Enneagram doesn't have color, it's a suggestion that, well, maybe it needs color or maybe it doesn't. But it's just a kind of a suggestion or hint, because we were talking about the symbol as being like a building or like an architecture. And certainly color is so important in architecture and the role that it plays. And even, for instance, the wavelengths that you were talking about and how we're influenced by color and so forth. So is there a way that color can be incorporated into the Enneagram? At what point? Maybe not in the actual drawing itself, but in the stages that lead up to something. Or should we just leave it the way it is and it doesn't need that? It's just kind of a question that's put out there, but it is, because we were explaining it with architecture, it is part of architecture, but it's not really a part of the Sufi Enneagram as it is used today. But that doesn't mean that it can't be improved upon in terms of healing, particularly because the mystics use color in determining the state or hall of a particular disciple and where they are. And it also, color is very important in our dreams. And in terms of telling us where our physical elements might be, depending on what colors we see. So it's just a question, really, and a comparison to architecture.
Okay.
As further thought for young people like you to be thinking about, how to incorporate it. Does it need to be incorporated? Should it be? Shouldn't it be? Just questions kind of like that.
Okay. And thank you for mentioning that I'm young, because I'm not that young anymore. So.
No, you're very young. Believe me.
Yeah.
Mashallah, mashallah.
I'm 50. So another question regarding those 4 humors. Yes. Because you related them, each one of them, to 3 zodiac signs.
Yes.
How is it related? I mean, does, for example, Taurus, Virgo, and the third zodiac sign has more of this humor, or how is it related?
It has the elemental qualities that formed the humors in us, in our bodies. So it's not that they have the humors, but they have these elemental qualities. And as I said, if you were to do a astrological reading of your birth date, but it's important if you know the time you were born, not just the day. When they do the reading, it's much more exact if you know the time of your birth. Then it will tell you these 4 elements and how much your chart has of these elements based on these zodiacal signs of the ones that are hot, cold, wet, and dry. So if you were born in Capricorn, you would think, okay, I'm born under this sign, so this sign is cold and dry. But for some reason, I have, 20%, I only have 20% cold and dry, or the earth element, but I have 50% fire. So I'm much more of a hot and dry temperament than I am cold and dry, just because I was born under that sign. So that means there were other influences. For instance, the place where you were born, the climate of the place you were born, also your parents and what their signs had been. So there are a lot of connection. Your mother and the food that she ate when you were pregnant and when she was pregnant, and so all of these are considerations that the chart takes into effect. Things that the chart takes into consideration when it does look at all the planets and all the stars at the time of a birth in a particular area at a particular time. So it's not that these Capricorn and Virgo and Taurus and so forth, that they have the humors, they have the elements, and that these elements then are considered to descend into the sublunar world, where they form their actual shape. They form being hot and dry, or they form being cold and wet. Because in the stars, three of them are this way, three this way, three this way, three, in terms of the zodiacal signs. But when they come to the sublunar world, they're all four of these are in the sublunar world. So influences from the stars on us is also one of the elements to consider.
Yeah. And also you mentioned that there are some healing schools in the Far East that these four humors are core in their practice. Can you mention some of them, or which?
Well, they're the famous Ayurvedic and Chinese systems of healing. Ayurvedic is the Indian. It's the Hindu-based.
Ayurvedic?
Yeah, Ayurvedic.
A-Y?
It's A-Y-E-R-U, Ayurvedic. Ayurvedic. It's based on the Hindu scriptures called the Vedas.
Yes.
The Vedas.
Ayurvedic.
So, and the Chinese is more or less based on it's called the Tao Te Ching, or the Book of Changes.
Yes.
By Lao Tse. It's called Taoism. It's spelled with a T, Taoism, but it's pronounced with a D, Taoism. So Chinese medicine, and it's fascinating. If you look at YouTube and you look at Chinese medicine stores, there are 1.2 billion people, and 99% of them are still using traditional medicine. And the stores that you see them going into the stores and buying this and that herb and so forth. I mean, it's just fascinating. So, in India, they use more the Ayurvedic, or what they call Islamic medicine in India and Pakistan is called Unani medicine, which means Greek medicine.
Unani.
Because, it kind of came from the Greeks, but they failed to, because the reason what happened was the British were ruling in India, and they came across this system, and so they called it Greek, rather than acknowledging that the Islamic scholars had played a major role in the development of it from the Greeks, because it's not exactly Hippocrates, who was one of the early Greeks, or Galen's medicine, but they added a lot to it, particularly Ibn Sina, who actually experimented and used it with patients. So it was experiential knowledge. It wasn't just book knowledge. And the Canon of Medicine, Ibn Sina's famous work of 5 volumes, was used in Europe for 600 years as the only medical textbook. So in Europe, it's called it's called Abyssinian medicine, but in the East, it's called Unani medicine. So again, we're off, not on the same page.
Yes.
And so we're not included with Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine to the same extent. So India uses both the Ayurvedic, and then the Muslims of India, which is the largest populations of Muslims in the world is in India, or maybe Indonesia, but they're close, they use Unani medicine, which is the same Ibn Sina medicine.
What's the same?
Yeah.
It's very ironically, yes. It's very,
yes. Yeah. It's another one of the conspiracies of the colonials. Yeah.
It's the same like the letters, the Hindi letters and the Arabic letters here.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Hindi letters is the Arabic letters that we are writing right now. So something like this. Yeah.
Oh, really? The Hindi letters are Arabic letters?
Yes.
Oh, the numbers. The numbers.
Sorry. As if no. Sorry, the numbers. The numbers.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. They're the Arabic numerals, but they're called Hindu. Yeah.
Yes.
Hindi. Yeah.
Yes, the Hindi. Yes.
Right. So we need to wake up and, as they say, toot our own horn and wake up and, tell the world about our tradition and our culture and civilization and all the great works that we did and great scholars and philosophers and people that we had, rather than, learning about Thomas Jefferson, like over here, or George Washington or whatever they're teaching us. Yeah, we need to learn our own tradition.
Yeah, we need to wake up, exactly as you said, because we need to be part of this world again, as we used to.
Yes, inshallah.
Okay, guys, any question, any comments, any wish, any? Okay.
Okay, so inshallah tomorrow, same time.
Okay, tomorrow inshallah, same time at 6 o'clock. Yes.
Yeah, inshallah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.